part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane.
This is Jason J. Lewis, the voice of Superman on Justice League Action. This is Mark Wade, writer of Superman Birthright, and you're listening to the Krypton Report.
Welcome to the Krypton Report podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, the Superman of Blue, the Man of Tomorrow. And in today's episode, we're going to look at a couple of different things for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we're looking at Superman and correlation with dogs as we get ready to celebrate DC Super Pets and look at Crypto, the Superpup. The other thing is we're looking at 2 unaired pilots for Super Project. And that ties in one with my watch of the summer of watching Superboy. And the other it ties into is the fact that I had recently watched the Superman serials, Superman the Mole Man, which is the start of the George Reeves era. And these two that we're talking about today represent the post-end of George Reeves era. And what we're talking about is the pilot for Superpup and the pilot for The Adventures of Superboy. Now, George Reeves died in 1959. And what's interesting is he hadn't signed on to do more The Adventures of Superman. And so finding Superpup is dated at 1958. But it was filmed at the end of 57 after that season of The Adventures of Superman had finished filming, is what it says. Now, there's not a whole lot to find on Superpup. And for anyone who's like, what is Superpup? There's little tiny clips on YouTube, but the biggest thing to look for is the Look Up in the Sky Superman documentary that used to be on DC Universe that I don't know if it's on HBO Max. That has a little bit in it just to give you a sense of what the show was. But also, and God bless it, the Blu-ray box set of the Superman films. This being Superman the Movie Deluxe Edition, Superman 2, the Richard Donner, Superman 3, Superman 4, and Superman Returns. And then the last disc is all bonus. Has so much wonderful bonus material to mine. It's amazing. We could do a whole podcast on that box set of just digging into what it has to offer. From all the Fleischer studio cartoons, the Looney Tunes that has Bugs and Daffy being Superman, a couple of documentaries, a couple commentaries, the Look Up in the Sky documentary, but it also has the pilot for Superpup. And then, of course, Superman and the Mole Man as a film, which is what I watched, compared to that it's actually attached to the first season, broken up into the 2 episodes as it was shown on television as part of the Adventures of Superman TV series. Now, I do find it interesting how much the title Adventures of Superman or Superboy is used when the Superman comic didn't really use that. Also, the second project we're looking at is the Adventures of Superman pilot, or Superboy pilot from 1961, starring Johnny Rockwell. Now, I have heard that the Smallville Complete Series box set released it as a special feature, which I need to dig into, honestly. I found it online years ago. It has poor quality, but it's something to keep because it is an interesting look into what could have been. Now we're going to go one by one and talk about these pilots, what could have been a lost era of the Super series, the world, and you'll get my feedback. So, are you ready to take a venture into Superpup? The Adventures of Superpup utilized the sets from the George Reeves series. Now, there's not a lot known, so I'm just going to read you the things that are on IMDb trivia because there's not a lot. The pilot was filmed in November of 1957, 1 week after the final episode of Adventures of Superman 1952 had wrapped. and it utilized several of the same sets and the same crew. This short was actually a pilot for a proposed series. It was created in an effort by the network to salvage adventures of Superman after the deaths of star George Reeves. The characters were all animal parodies of those from the series starring little people in large masks. The series was never picked up, and this short was never broadcast, for good reason. The budget of this pilot was between $25,000 and $30,000, half the budget of Superman. Interesting. Also, I didn't do the math to put that into what modern day dollars. Instead of dubbing in the voices, the actors who provided the characters were seated off camera, reciting the dialogue as it was filmed. The dog masks were constructed of fiberglass and weighed 2 to 3 pounds. The filmmakers intended to construct puppets of the characters that could articulate dialogue in close-ups, but the budget didn't allow for it, though they planned to make the puppets if the pilot was picked up as a series. Superpup's identity, get ready for this, is Bark Bent. Of Clark Kent, Bark Bent. And the other big thing is they worked for the Daily Bugle. This is pre-Spider-Man. And the name of the paper is the Daily Bugle, which would one day be what Peter Parker works for as Spider-Man. So that's some trivia on Superpup. Now, let's get into it. Okay. So the only noticeable actor that is technically a little person is the editor-in-chief, which is a bulldog, and I'm not exactly sure what his name is. It was very hard to listen and hear, because even though this is on the Blu-ray release and everything, it still was not preserved well over time. And there's no origin to the episode. It just starts. And we have a narrator that is a literal hand puppet that pops out of Bark's desk. And part of me wonders whose idea was this? You know, Whitney Ellsworth, publisher of DC Comics, these National Allied publications at the time, is written as writer on this. And I'm just like, what were you thinking? Because even showing this to kids, my kids were like, what is this? It's creepy. It's like Chuck E. Cheese when, you know, you were little and the animatronics were what they're playing and they were kind of scary. It was like that. And Solomon pointed out and said, it's bad because you can see that they're not really puppies. They're just regular people wearing puppy masks because their bodies are the same. And they're wearing, it's like those early pictures of Mickey and Minnie Mouse when Disney World opened, where the costumes just weren't quite there. They were creepy. Or when you go to the mall to get your picture with the Easter Bunny and it's just not right. The characters are wearing white gloves as if they are some sort of Disney-based character with these oversized dog heads. And the suit is just the Superman suit. It literally like they were filming Superman and then just threw masks on everybody. But it's so bad. I mean, I suffered this for you guys and for this. Okay? I would not recommend anybody watch this. Let me do the hard work for you. There's no origin. Their mouths don't move most of the time. And the story just kind of starts in a very weird, like, where are we going? And we have the ref for Professor Sheepdip. And there's more time being spent in this episode with Sheepdip and his henchman, who's a wolf, than there is with Bark. And also Pamela Poodle, who is our Lois Lane. We have basically Professor Sheepdip breaks out of jail because of his wolf, and we spend a whole moment with them while they're going to blow up the Daily Bugle by putting the wolf has a homemade bomb, and he puts on a costume of a grandfather clock, and he walks from their hideout in the hills to the Daily Bugle, and walks in as a clock. Now, the hand puppet mouse pops up a couple of times and narrates for what's going on and talks, and even interacts and talks with Bark. Our It's very campy, very cartoonish, but not in the fun, enjoyable way. The shot of Superpup flying, it looks like the same shot from the George Reeves series, and they just superimposed a dog head over top of George. And if I missed this, the police officer is Sergeant Beagle. He's the other character in the series. And when Bark does show up to help the editor, I think they said Jerry, but I'm not sure, honestly, because the dialogue is very rough to hear, and there's no subtitles. Bart comes in, and he's very cartoonish because instead of going after the clock that's moving and where the bomb is, he's throwing everything else in the editor's office out the window. It is very, very non-funny to what you would expect to be an enjoyable, at least, cartoonish style show. And what else I found interesting is the episode starts in color, and then all of a sudden it's like it goes to flip reels and it's in black and white, in a very dark, grainy black and white. And it goes on, and they convince Pamela to go out, and she goes out to the desert to check on something, and she sees a rocket, and then the next thing you know, she's surrounded by the Professor Sheepdip and the wolf who Bart picked up in the clock and flew out and just dropped off in the hill desert area. And now she is strapped to the rocket, and Superpup goes after her. There is a couple of tongue-in-cheek references when the mouse even says, "Look, they change cars," because Professor Sheepdip and the wolf change cars to get away. There is, and then of course, the rocket that Superpup saved Pamela Poodle from, he does turn around and send back after Professor Sheepdip and causes their car to blow. Then back at the office, there's, tongue-in-cheek references and conversation between Pamela Poodle and Bark, where she says, "Good thing Superpup saved the day." He's like, "Yeah, I did." She's like, "What? You're not Superpup." Oh. And it's trying to be funny and like the show, but it is horrible. I do not recommend anybody ever watch this unless you really need to see it for yourself to believe it. I would just say watch the documentary. It does not surprise me at all why this did not get picked up. It's pretty obvious. It's bad. It ends, and it doesn't even really feel like you watched an episode of anything. The beats are off. The playfulness is off. Even for that time, if you're familiar with television at that time. So that ends 1958. Like I said, that's what it's credited as. Superpup. Hey, we're going to press pause and hear a few words from our other podcasts on Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us, and then listen in.
If you want to keep Krypton from exploding, join our $1 a month Patreon. That's right, for $1 a month, you'll get extra special content that you don't get on the main show, like movie commentaries and whatever else comes out of our mouths. So check it out, patreon.com/Krypton Report.
If you are like Tyler and James and can't get enough super talk, check out these other podcasts. Digging for Kryptonite, Supergirl Radio, The Last Sons of Krypton, the Superboy Legacy Podcast, All-Star Superfans, Superman the Animated Podcast, The Aspiring Kryptonians, Always Hold On to Smallville, Caped Wonder, The Geek of Steel, and Truth, Justice, and Hope podcast.
This is Dan Jurgens, and if you want to have a good time, keep listening to the Krypton Report.
So now let's jump over to 1961. We have The Adventures of Superboy with Johnny Rockwell. Now, like I said, I need to see if this is as a bonus feature on the Smallville box set, as I've heard. And I wish that this was actually a bonus feature on that box set of Superman stuff. The only two things I think that box set is missing is it should have just went ahead and included the Supergirl film, and this is a bonus feature, because then it would be like the most complete Superman experience possible of that era. And then, of course, you would have the Superboy show and then Lois and Clark, etc. on its own. But that's the only thing that thing is missing. Like I said, it is poor quality, so some of the dialogue was a little hard to see and some of the shots were dark. But I will just go on and say it. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It does play out more like an episode of the George Reeves series. And it's boggling to me as I've tried to find out what I could. Why this didn't actually get picked up? Why is this not a series that we're talking about? Because it could have ran for a little while. My friend Anthony quoted it as saying it felt like the George Reeves show is just set Smallville. And if you're trying to find a way to bring Superman, Superboy back after George's passing, I felt like this is the way to do it, where it feels similar enough, but yet has new characters and cast. So I'm not sure why this didn't get picked up, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I will now talk about it. Like I said, the quality is poor, and it starts with a narration. There are little clips of this on YouTube you can find. And the narration, does much like the George Reeves series of who he is, what he stands for, and Johnny Rockwell does do the poses, the super poses that we're accustomed to seeing and accustomed in the previous series. We start in Smallville, and before we get started, I'll jump on here and read you the IMDb trivia to this to kind of get some background on. It's labeled as a 1961 TV movie for. I'm not sure if it ever aired. Johnny Rockwell starred as Superboy, Clark Kent, Bunny Henning, Lana Lang, Ross Elliott, Mr. Drake, Monty Margaret as Mrs. Kent, and then we had Robert B. Williams as Police Chief Parker, and that's our main cast as far as character. Now we have the villain, we have the theater manager, Shifty, Miss Gibson, Jake, Gunner, Birdie, that are all part of. Now, Whitney Ellsworth also did it, so I find that very interesting. He was part of Right This. Star Johnny Rockwell was dumbfounded when he received his Superman costume, which was gray and brown. He was told that since the pilot was being filmed in black and white, the gray and brown costume would read better on screen than the traditional red and blue outfit. Which is true, because that's what they did the same for The Adventures of Superman and for Kirk Allen. The pilot was filmed after the death of George, who had already agreed to do another season of The Adventures of Superman. So that's what I find interesting, is the timeline on everything. I said, what is 61? This pilot is an adaptation of the story The Saddest Boy in Smallville, which was published in issue 88 of Superboy Comics, cover date April 1961. The story was written by Leo Dorfman and illustrated by George Papp. Although only the pilot was made, 12 additional episodes were written, screenplay for which are included in the book Superboy, Superpup, The Lost Pilot. Well, guess who's got a book to find out? So that's all the trivia I have. It doesn't have any kind of release information because it was, and it's kind of a shame. But we start in the classroom of Smallville High, where the class is being assigned about their father. You're talking about their father, and Lana and Clark are there, and they have a friend who I think is funny. His name is Jim Drake, and I do think it's funny because I'm all about names. So the fact that his name is Jim, and they call him Jim, or there might even be a Jimmy reference, and I'm like, you couldn't have found a better name, like, to go with these characters, like a new name, like, because when we hear Jimmy, we think Jimmy Olsen. There's no Pete Ross, so I thought that was interesting. They could have, but like I said, they could have just named him like Tim. Tim would have been great. But he's talking about how his father's just the doorman at the movie theater in Smallville. And Clark makes the line about my father works at a grocery store. Lana says my father is a teacher. And then Jimmy Drake here, points out that Clark's parents own the grocery store. And Lana's father is a professor, which is comic accurate, as Clark's parents at one time, the Kents, did own a grocery store. Now, we don't meet Jonathan in this, but we do meet Martha. Now, what I do find is in the next scene, you have Jimmy working on his homework, and he's talking to his dad, and he's very... I don't want to say he's negative towards his father, but he's talking to him, and his father's working on something. We don't know exactly what his father's working on, both of it. And he starts talking about his dad's job, and his dad gives a really great speech about not all people can be pilots or something like this, that life happens and you have responsibilities and you need to take care of your family, and you get a normal job. It doesn't matter because you're there to take care of your kids and your family. And we know that Jim's mom passed away, and it's just him and his father, and he talks about he does what he does because it provides for them, and he's okay with it. And as a father myself, I remind myself at times, my kids think of me already as something else. I don't have to always be that to myself. As much as I struggle to want to be something more, do more, the bottom line is I need to make sure that they're taken, no matter what job. And it can be humbling. And I think it's a very great way of looking at things, because I feel like, and I could be wrong, but in the past, like, having a job was important and people respect each other. And now I feel like a lot of jobs that we look down on at people, but it's important that they have a job that provides. We learn that his father is doing art lessons and correspondence lessons through the mail, and wants to be an artist, a drawer. We find out that the movie theater in Smallville is having a hometown movie star, we never get a name, premiering their new Arab-style themed film there in Smallville. And there's, for some reason, to promote it, there's $200,000 worth of diamonds in front of the theater, being guarded by 2 police officers. Now, we find out that the criminals in town are going to split the job $50,000 apiece, and the math doesn't work. There's only 3 of them, unless there's a 4th hidden person we never meet. And they're going to knock over and get these diamonds, and one of them is going to be the decoy. We learned that 2 of them are known robbers, and they just have plastic surgery to cover up who they are so that they can't be identified. And the 3rd guy is going to be the distraction. So the 3rd guy gets dropped off at this house. There's a tip, and the police officer goes to investigate, and he starts shooting at the police officer. And we get the officer, Parker, pulls out his radio and starts radioing for Superboy. And now we cut to Clark and Lana sitting there doing their homework. This is where we meet Martha. And a light in the room starts flickering. And Lana's like, what is that? Clark's like, it must be a bad bulb or something. And then Martha kind of does something about it's time to, go, that they should be going. And Martha escorts Lana out. And Clark gets up, goes over to the bookcase, turns the bookcase, and goes into like a secret room. There's like a radio in there. And he's like, and he answers like, this is Superboy. And he finds out the situation. I thought that was cool. It's like very early. And I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar. I'm trying to get there in my comic reading with Superboy comics of that era, if that was something that was in the comics. I don't know. I'll be honest. And we see him change into his Superboy costume, and then he opens the thing and drops down underneath into like it looks like a cave. And like I said, it was hard to see. It was very dark, and the footage is very poor. And he goes down this cave and then goes into, and it looks like he runs through a deep tunnel and comes out in woods. Not sure how all that works geographically, and where the Kent's home is and all that. And like I said, it was hard to see, but I thought it was neat though. This is pre-Batman 66, you know, so it made me think of like the Batcave, the tunnel, how the Batmobile comes out, the Bat phone, you know, with the radio and stuff. So I found it all interesting. Superboy arrives and, you know, shows up, talks to the chief. He goes up to the house. The guy, of course, does the obligatory shoot Superboy man with bullets just because that's an awesome effect. And he takes him down. Now, meanwhile, they're robbing, at the same time, they're robbing the diamond. They gas it, and Mr. Drake gets a look at the two people who are stealing the diamonds. Superboy shows up, because they get the radio call in, and he sits there, and Mr. Drake's talking, and Jimmy shows up for some reason. He's there, and Superboy's like, let's all go down to the police station. And this made me chuckle, because they're like, right, Superboy. And they all get in the car together and drive to the police station. Superboy in the car. That was fun. And they're looking at mugshots, and Jim talks to his dad like, hey, why don't you draw the... And he's they're like, yeah, go ahead. So Mr. Drake sketches people that he saw, and they want to put the other guy under a lie detector, and they're not able to do it or whatever. So Superboy is like, I got an idea, bring him out here. Meanwhile, he sends Jimmy to the basement to get some coal, and he talks about how coal and diamonds are related, and Superboy takes the coal and crushes it in his hand and makes some diamonds to replace visually the diamonds that were stolen, until they can actually get the real diamonds back to help out the theater. Now, Superboy, as they interrogate the third guy, Shifty, he listens and uses his hearing for the heartbeat and all that as he asks him some specific questions to know that he was, in fact, part of this robbery and it was all planned out together. They decide to run the sketches in the paper, but not list who the artist was, so that they can try to protect Mr. Drake's information. But somehow the villains do discover that it's Mr. Drake. They call saying that his son is in the hospital, the emergency room, and he needs to come, and he shows up, and the thugs pull a gun on him. Now, while this is going on, Superboy is at home or at school taking an exam, and he's just kind of staring off into space, and we see he's using his supervision and x-ray vision to look through the walls and scanning, and sees them doing this to Mr. Drake. And he takes off, and we get a really cool shot of Superboy flying, much like in the George Reeves series, but then we also get a shot of him flying from the front. So it's like he's flying towards us, flying towards the camera, which I thought was really, really cool. And technically it was awesome. And I am starting, as of this recording, I have started my George Reeves The Adventure Man watch. And I'm going to be going through the entire series. So this was cool to kind of see what would have been after and technologically where the show goes. Because I know it starts in black and white and ends. But Superboy shows up. They capture them. They have Mr. Drake in the car, and Superboy shows up, lands right in front of the car, crushes the front of the car, saves Mr. Drake, gets the guys arrested, and the company, the insurance company, whatever, that had the diamonds, is so thankful that they're recovered. They want to offer a reward to Mr. Drake. They offer him a job in Metropolis, and they offer a full scholarship to Jimmy. Which goes back to that speech where he talked about, a father's job of providing for their kids, and the father's job is to try to make sure that they're kids have it better and have more than what they had. And I think that's one of the hardest things about being a dad. Is trying to pass on lessons to your kids, because you can tell your kid and they listen, but they don't understand. It doesn't connect. It's only through their growing and hardship, I think, that at times they connect with stuff. I struggle with that with my own kids. Solomon, especially because he thinks he knows everything. It is. The episode ends with Jimmy talking to his dad, Spades, as they're in the classroom, and Jimmy's talking about, he's giving his speech on who his dad is. You know, the one he was afraid of because he didn't feel that his father's job was important. But now he not only talks about his father's job, but his father as a person. And I think it was a great message. And I honestly would have liked to have seen this go to series. I think I want to know why it didn't. And I really want to see. I would have liked to have seen more. Because I really enjoyed Johnny Rockwell as Superboy Clark Kent. I think he did a good job. I think, you know, it was, you know, it's a pilot of a you know, it's a pilot 20-some minute series, and so, you know, splitting between Clark, the other characters, and Superboy can be complicated, but I really like what he did. And I recommend, if you can find it, search for it. It's awesome. Or just send me a message. I have it in my Google Drive. I'll send you. No problem. So this wraps up kind of a chapter of what could have been in Super fandom. And it's a nice snapshot of the two pilots. I definitely take the Superboy show. And I wish it had been done. And I wish it was readily available for everyone to enjoy. Much like how later we would get like the Aquaman pilot that you can find. Now, we do have there's 3 more, technically, pilots. We've talked about the Wonder Woman pilot. I don't think we ever really touched on the Aquaman pilot. And then the Justice League pilot. So, those will be somewhere in the future, the Aquaman and the Justice League. So, just remember.
Look up in the sky. Yes, it's me, Sailor.
We just want to say, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please check out other podcasts on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Remember to check out Krypton Report on all social media platforms. Go to linktree.com/Krypton Report. You find all of our information right there.